Hey everybody, what's going on, and welcome to GNR Central. And I want to follow up and do sort of a part 2 to a video I did last week, and that was about the 1987 Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue tour. Now, one of my pet peeves when I do these videos is that, knowing my luck, I'll literally watch an interview from Guns N' Roses like a day later, and then they'll mention whatever topic I talked about, which in this case was Motley Crue. So I want to talk a bit more about the 1987 tour that they did. So Guns N' Roses toured with Motley Crue for about a month, and I wanted to correct something I said last week, which is that Whitesnake was supposed to open for Motley Crue and that they ended up bowing out because they went on their own tour. Whitesnake still did open for Motley Crue earlier in the year, but then they were supposed to open once again in November of 1987. But by that time, they'd gotten a lot more popular, and they figured they could just probably tour on their own. So Guns N' Roses got the opening act slot, and they toured with Motley Crue for about a month. Guns was supposed to play with Motley Crue throughout 1988, at least in the winter months when they went to Europe. But basically, Doc McGee was so concerned about the health of the members and their addictions that they ended up canceling any dates in 1988 for the Girls tour, so Guns never ended up going to Europe with Motley Crue. Now, getting back to the Guns N' Roses and the Motley Crue 1987 tour, there was an interview that Guns N' Roses did at CBGB's in New York. They had played an acoustic set there, and in an interview they gave afterwards, the band members talked about going on the road with Motley Crue. And in the interview they revealed that Guns N' Roses was supposed to open up for Motley Crue earlier in 1987, but the band wasn't ready yet because appetite hadn't dropped at that point in time.
Are you looking forward to opening up for Motley Crue?
Yeah. 3 more days. Oh, yeah. 4 more days. Oh, yeah.
How did you end up opening up for
Well, we were going to do it on the original beginning of their tour, but we weren't ready yet. Our album hadn't been put out yet, and so they got Whitesnake. And they were real happy with that, but now Whitesnake is ready to start headlining on their own, and they like us and we like them, so it's like we're ready to do it. They're rolling out like the red carpet. I mean, they're giving us more lights than they usually give an opening act. They're giving us more monitors, more things. Yeah, they're really helping us because they're into what we're doing. And like someone told me the other day, Circus Magazine told me that Vince Neil said some nice things about us. He goes, besides, I figure that any kid that has a Guns N' Roses album has a Motley Crue album too, so this is going to be great.
It's probably, if you think about it,
I think it'll be a good show for the kids.
The best tour. You know, I mean, for what we do, for what Motley Crue does, what we do.
It's pretty legit.
Like, putting it right together. It's like, who else, you know? There hasn't been a rumble.
It's pretty legit and unpretentious and not aimed at top 40 radio. You know, it's aimed at just coming from the heart, rock and roll.
Do you think Vince being a teetotaler, or at least doing these rad commercials, will affect any kind of backstage antics during this tour?
I think we have to do those because of other reasons. I wouldn't even want to get involved.
Yeah, and I don't think it'll affect us. You know, it's like we won't do anything to stir up any trouble on the tour. You know, in the hotel rooms is another story.
Living such a quote-unquote reckless life, do you think there's any danger of burning out too early? Do you plan on being around for a couple of years?
I'm not necessarily interested in the longevity. As long as the music sticks around.
As far as I'm concerned, it's just as long as we believe in what we're doing. You know,
we care about each other enough to keep each other in line. You know?
And the month-long tour went pretty well. There weren't a lot of incidents, apart from the fact that Axl got arrested in Atlanta, Georgia. They played 2 shows there in Atlanta at the Omni. It was the second show where he got into a scuffle with security and got arrested. And the subsequent shows, he basically blasted security and the cops in Atlanta. Now, even though there weren't that many incidents, Axl did have some vocal trouble on the tour, and there was an interview that MTV Japan did while the band was in Tennessee. And here's a snippet of Axl during the interview where he talked about some of his throat problems he had during the tour.
I think tonight was a blast. Tonight was a really fun show. It's like I haven't felt too good physically. I've been having throat problems, tonsillitis and stuff on this tour. And tonight was kind of like the first time everything was back in gear, and just the kids were great. Lots of fun tonight.
Now, some newspaper outlets reported that it was laryngitis that Axl was dealing with, and that wasn't the only issue they had. They were also dealing with faulty stage monitors that often didn't allow Axl to hear his own voice, which forced him to screech even louder over the band's instruments. And he said, "I'm not used to screaming over no monitors," Rose complained testily. And somewhere in upstate New York, Duff McKagan somehow managed to basically plunge headlong out the open doors of the tour bus landing squarely on his shaggy noggin. Duff would later recall that Slash fell against me and I fell out of my chair straight onto the ground about 5 feet. Concussion time, knocked out. They thought I was dead, says Duff, explaining his brush with rock and roll mortality. Right now I've got the flu, an effed up knee from what happened, and my head hurts. Duff summed it up by adding, it's a swell period for me right now and only 6 more weeks to go on the road. Now around the same time, Axl gave another interview where he talked about touring with Motley Crue, and he was asked, with the experience under your belt now, you think you would approach, like, say, a future world tour differently? What did you learn from that experience? And he said, we gained a lot more confidence, in working the stage and dealing with the crowds. And then we came back, we did a club tour of New York, which was a lot like, New York and Philly and Boston and stuff like that. And playing New York was a lot like playing LA. We had to win those people over. And then we went out with Motley, and that was pretty insane, because like any night that we did 2 nights in a row, the first night, we got them going. But if we did 2 nights in a row, when we came back the second night, they were like, whoa, now we know what these guys are all about. And the first time people see us, a lot of the times, unless they've heard us on the radio and are into us, they're more into watching and checking us out and watching every little thing. But by the time you do a second night, they lose their minds. They're like, yeah, now I can let myself go. Axl reflected a bit more on that tour, being asked, so you guys have the same mentors to people you want to aspire to become like? And he said, well, there were people that were our favorite bands. I figured that touring with Motley Crue would be the great learning experience, and that was. Opening for Alice Cooper was monumental because me and Izzy, it's funny, we leave Alice Cooper on stage and go backstage to our showers and have an old Alice Cooper tape in. And, in the deck playing, and not because we were on tour with Alice Cooper, but because that's the stuff we listen to. And I go, wait a minute, man, we'll shut the tape off and go out and watch it live for the first time in our lives. Axl would also go on to compare how Guns N' Roses tour and their live stage show compared to Motley Crue's, to which Axl said they have more of a theatrical thing, which for its own aspects and the way it's done, they work very hard at it. And I have to respect those things. But they have their own beliefs and way of doing things. They are Motley Crue and we're Guns N' Roses. We have our own way of looking at things, what we will and won't do, and they have their things. Like they plan to do a show every night. We don't do that stuff. It's not what we believe in. But then again, I'm not going to say it's just bad because they do it. And it's easy for a band to say, oh, what they do sucks about another band. But when you're out touring with them and seeing all the work they put into it and how professional they are and how much they care and they love what they do. And Slash went on to say, it was great. We went out with the Cult, then we did a tour of the East Coast headlining, then we went out with Motley Crue, which was great. I mean, playing 15,000 seaters and stuff with bands like ourselves, just fresh out of the clubs. It went over really well, and then we went out with Alice Cooper. And Slash did reveal that touring with Motley Crue was actually really good for the record sales as well. So he was first asked, how did you like working with Geffen Records? To which Slash said, well, they've been great and they're really happy. We're going to be going gold pretty soon. We've sold 400,000 copies so far. The Motley thing was really the show to help us sell records. Whereas all the other gigs, people showed up because they already bought the record. Playing 15,000 seaters, there's a good portion of these people who don't have it. So when you get that much exposure, we sold 18,000 records from that one Motley gig. And there was one really funny interview that Axl and Duff gave. It was published in early 1988, but normally these interviews are done a couple months before. So it was done during the Motley Crue, and it was just between Axl and Duff, and then Slash basically barged in. So according to the interviewer who wrote the article, they said, but before Axl can explain how his religious background figures into Guns N' Roses, turbulence once again bursts in the person of Slash. The band's vodka bottles have been disappearing. Slash said, it's Motley Crue drummer Tommy Lee's little sister, he says, swinging his bottle of Jim Beam. She's a real pain in the ass. Now, the tour manager promises to take care of her, and tranquility, however fragile, is temporarily restored. But even this is short-lived, as the mythological contingencies of being an old-fashioned rock and roll band, not to mention 7 unhappy women, hover just outside. And Axl even celebrated how little trouble he got into the law. He said, this year, Axl says, I was only arrested once at the Canadian border for my stun gun. I didn't know they were illegal there. And then he went on to say, Slash and I almost got arrested in Seattle, added Duff. We went back there for a little vacation. We were going to burn down some bar. Then on the way back to LA, we were drunker than shit, and we sat next to a kindergarten teacher on the plane. First, she told us to calm down. Then she pulled out the book she wrote called From A to Z, and she read it to us and drew pictures for us. And by the end of the flight, we were so tranquil, ready to sleep. So the question has to be asked, would Vince Neil ever tour with Guns N' Roses again? And what was his opinion of Axl? So here's what he had to say during an early 90s interview when he was promoting his solo career.
Yeah, Axl's got a thing out for you, I think, isn't he?
He's a fucking pussy. He won't fight me, but You know,
What's-
he said anytime, let's go, but he won't do it.
What's the problem there with you guys?
He's a fucking wimp, that's all.
Yeah.
He's got a big mouth, and he
Just
won't
mouthed
shut
off
up.
to you one time, did he?
Huh?
Did he mouth off to you one time?
Yeah.
Oh.
He's a fucking poser.
I guess you won't be doing any tours with them.
Fuck you. We would never tour with fucking anybody like that.
Yeah.
I mean, they opened up for us, a few years ago, and that's when they were cool, but then they turned into fucking rock stars. But